Key Concept 3.3 is mainly about how trade impacted different regions and cities and populations and things like that. So the first Roman numeral is about different innovations that help increase agriculture. So things that had like different ways of farming and like new innovations that created more farmable land or better ways to farm and to grow crops. So these are things like terracing and chinampas for the Aztec Empire and different things like that. And then in addition to this, it says industrial production. So China had more production of silk, and they were especially popular for porcelain, and their metal industry increased. The second Roman numeral is about cities. So there were a lot of things that affected the growth and decrease in population of cities, and so like things like invasions and disease would severely impact the population because it would decrease it because either people would die or cities would get smaller because people would die or they would be invaded and taken over. But then and things like that would affect trade routes as well because there would be less people and more disease spread along it. But if you had safe and reliable transport and you had better agriculture, that's another thing. They would increase agriculture, and that would increase trade. And increasing population would increase urbanization and trade. The third one is talking about different structures of like labor and different forms of how you like manage people to work and to do labor, and how it also affected the different things like affected gender. So there was a lot of diversification of labor, and there would be like conscripted labor, so like slave labor, and then feudalism was a big thing that also did this, but that was in the last key concept. And just different things based on how you'd get people to work, especially for like the government or for the production of food or for the upper class. And then next is about gender, so like the patriarchy. It increased in some places, like China, especially in the upper class, because you would have foot binding and you'd have more emphasis on like the male members of the family and them controlling the female members, and then basically getting them married, and then their husband would control them. But then in things like with the Mongols, you would have it where the women were usually more equal because the Mongols were not super concerned with like what everyone did, so women would have more rights there, and they wouldn't be just controlled by their family members. Like it wouldn't be like that. These are some vocabulary terms. The first ones are all farming techniques and like agricultural techniques that were developed in this time period. So you'd see terracing. You'd terrace the land so that there would be more land to farm and healthier land and different land for different crops. The horse collar, it's a new way to use horses or like to get more use out of horses in farming. Then three field rotation, you'd have the land after you plant so much in it, it would get it would get all the nutrients taken out of it. And but if you kept one field open or like kept rotating fields and rotating the crops that were in fields, it'd have less nutrients taken out of it. And then Chinampas, Waru Waru is also terracing, basically, and it adds irrigation into that. And that was in the Incan Empire. But getting back to Chinampa, it was the Aztec Empire. The main city, Tenochtitlan, was on Lake Texcoco, so they'd bring up the bottom of the lake to increase like the land that they could farm on, and those were called Chinampas. The second one, these are all things that either increased or decreased population of cities. So like the Little Ice Age, it affected agriculture and it decreased it, which decreased the population of cities. And then urban revival and industrialization. Okay, so industrialization, increase in commerce, they would both increase urban revival because urban revival was like the revival of cities and like more people being in cities, so like the repopulation of cities. And then industrialization would be the increase in industry. So you could say that goes with China as well, because they had an increase in their steel industry. And then commerce is just trading and things like that. So if you had an increase in trade, that could lead to or cause like urban revival, or urban revival could lead to more commerce. And then the diversification of labor, that was just the different labor systems that were at this time. The third Roman numerals vocab, Neo-Confucianism was the new way of thought, like that combined Confucianism and some Buddhism and some Taoism, and it brought more or like a different way of thinking, especially with gender and things like that. And then guild, that was like the Hanseatic League, it'd be like a union basically, so to protect the workers. Then conscripted labor, that was basically like slave labor, and then Mita goes along with that because it was like a tax on labor, so like they would have to, like the people that the Incans conquered, they would have to provide public service and like labor for the Incans. And then peasant revolts, usually if the government were doing something that the peasants that didn't benefit the peasants, which was a lot because they'd be negligent or corrupt, and they'd tax everyone a lot, even if they were already poor. So there were a lot of peasant revolts revolving around the government and the structure of the government. Some evidence for this, the first picture is a chinampa, and that was used in the Aztec civilization, and it was used to increase the amount of land that they could farm on their lake. The next one is porcelain, because as discussed earlier, luxury goods would increase, and China produced a lot of porcelain. And then the second one is a rat that represents the plague, because the plague was spread by rats, and that decreased urbanization and population. The second one is agriculture, and if you had an increase in agriculture, it would increase the population and the amount of trade. And then if you had a decrease in agriculture, it would decrease population. Then the third one, it represents serfdom, or basically slave labor, which was once again a new form of labor. And then the second one is foot binding, and that shows that there was a more patriarchal society in China, especially in the upper class, because they would have more the men would have more control over the women, especially through foot binding. And then the maps, the first one is a manor, which goes along with feudalism, and it shows it doesn't exactly show, but in feudalism the serfs worked the manors, and since serfdom was a new form of labor, that's kind of where that ties in. And the second one is just of major cities at this time period, especially with trade or with large populations, so it could show urbanization and that cities grew and shrunk accordingly. Some primary documents, this is mostly about the Mongols, since they were big at this time, especially with also women, and that they did just conquer so much. They caused a lot of fluctuation with the in the population of cities, because they did spread the disease, but they did encourage safe trade and things like that. And the video is also on the Mongols, and that's all.